Hey everybody, welcome back. 1 second. All right, everybody, here you go. Welcome back. Good to see you guys. It's Wednesday, April the 15th. This is our class meeting for Intro to Philosophy, Cal State Fullerton. Basically, we've got one last day today to go over the topic of time. And with that, we're going to move on starting next week into one of our last subjects, which is the philosophy of mind. So I'm just waiting for 2:30, and then I'll be right with everybody here. Hope you guys are doing really good and hanging in there and staying safe and healthy as usual. Just checking my account here for a video that I was hoping to try and share with you guys. Let's see if it's possible to do that. Cool, we still got a few minutes until it's 2:30. So welcome everybody. Anybody here watching, feel free to say hi. Hit me with a little comment, and I'll definitely see it. If anybody has questions about anything involving, this class, the topics, schedule of meetings, or anything else, let me know. I sent around the prompts for the second essay today. I also adjusted the due date on that, but I'm going to wait till 2:30 to really speak about it because I want to make sure we've got as many people here as we can. Sometimes people, come in at the last moment, so just hanging in there for 2 minutes. Hi there, Brisa. How are you? Good to see you. Good to see everybody. Hey, Julian. Hey, nice to see you guys. Nicole, Daniel, everybody else. Welcome back. Hopefully you guys are having a great couple of weeks as we head towards the tail end of the semester. I know we've had a long and complicated semester, but anyways, you guys are doing a great job, and we're all getting through this together. So I really appreciate everybody here. Hey, Kenzie, nice to see you too. All right. And me, how am I doing? I'm doing great. Nothing really much different for me, just teaching from home instead of being in the class. Obviously not going out as much or doing anything socially, but just staying home and riding this one out. But I'm happy to say that I don't know anybody, none of my over 200 students or friends or family members have been seriously harmed or affected too badly by at least the health crisis that we're going through. Everyone's schedules have been upset, and some people have had disruptions to their work. But at least I don't know anybody who's gone seriously ill or, God forbid, die or anything. So let's try and knock on wood and keep the streak alive if we can. But welcome back to you guys. So first thing I wanted to say was that I sent around the prompts for the upcoming second essay. And I made just a couple of slight adjustments or changes. So first of all, in the original listed syllabus, the essay due date was 2 weeks from today. That would have been April the 29th, Wednesday. But the dates of the calendar got kind of mixed around a little bit when we had that whole shift to online instruction. And one class meeting had to be canceled because the school required that there was a non-instructional day. So, given all of that, I wanted to push back the due date slightly to make room for all the topics that I wanted to give you the choice to write about. So anyway, the due date has been adjusted to the final regular class meeting day. That's Wednesday, May 6th. So it's just been moved 7 days ahead from April 29th to May 6th. And you see that in the written text of the prompt that I sent to everybody. So just quickly, I'm going to read over this prompt and set of instructions, and people can always ask me later if they had more questions, but I kind of wanted to at least go over it once while I have you guys here at the live stream. So it just says, it's similar to the first essay format-wise. So all of your formatting guidelines that you took from the first essay, you're going to bring them back to the second one. It's basically a 3 to 4 page double-spaced essay in 12-point font with normal margins. And you have to pick one of the 3 prompts that are written down there below the text of the instructions. Of course, you're not allowed to use any internet resources or outside assistance, just your book, your class notes, and your own good common sense. So no, I don't want you to be looking at anything else that's ever been written or viewed in the whole universe except for what I've taught you through the book. Use the book itself. Feel free to derive quotes from the book. I think it's always a good idea to have a few. When you do use quotes from the book, simply place the quoted section in quote marks and put the page number at the tail end of that passage inside of parentheses. And then I'll know the page where you used the quote, where you got it from. If you have any very close paraphrases that are not identical to the text language verbatim, but are very close and you think you might be borrowing too much, it's okay. Simply enclose the page number if it's a very close paraphrase that's not simply your own words. So that's about it for citation. There's no need for a separate works cited or bibliography page. Just the writing of the text itself and the parenthetical page citations for any quotes or close paraphrases. Now, like I said before, I want your header on the first page to not be overly large with all types of items of information and a giant title, because I do want it to be 3 to 4 pages of the actual 12-point font, double-spaced, normal margins writing. So either create a separate cover page and then begin at the top of page 1 with your writing, or have a minimalist header with just your name, date, and title, and that would be sufficient. Okay. I think I've said before also that it's best not to have an extremely long-winded, complicated introduction or conclusion. Those are things that are not of the first importance to philosophy, where we just want to understand your analysis and breakdown of the arguments. So you can make it very brief and to the point with your intro and conclusion, or feel free to simply omit them and focus on the body paragraphs where you'll attack the prompt itself. Also in philosophy, it's best to just write in clear and straightforward words rather than trying to write in the most elegant prose that like Shakespeare might have written in. Because the point is not, are you some kind of poet, but do you just comprehend an argument logically, and can you prove to the greater me that you just have that basic understanding? So you can just make it, a little more Hemingway and a little less Faulkner when it comes to the level of elevated diction. Can't use internet resources or assistance. It's got to be written by you. And it's due in class on Wednesday, May 6th. It's worth 25% of your grade. So the first essay was 15%, the midterm was 30, that's 45. This is the second essay, it's worth 25, and that gets up to 70%. And then the final exam, that's the last thing coming later, and that will be the last 30% of the class. So anyway, just now you have your prompts. There are 3 topics. The first topic of these 3 is about stuff that we're going to start with next week. That's another reason that I did want to adjust the due date so that you have ample time to write on any of the prompts if you chose even the first one. So I'm giving you 3 options. Number 1, it's about the philosophy of mind and a debate about monism and dualism, which we will certainly learn about next week. But for the time being, you don't know a lot about that topic, of course, since we have not gone over it yet. At any rate, when I said in class, yes, sorry to confuse you. I meant to say, submitted electronically. Clearly there's no class anymore. When you say in class, we turn them in. Turn it in? No. You're just going to submit it to me. I'm not going to use any of those things, but I'll definitely catch you if you're trying to cheat. So don't cheat, but submit it to me as an email attachment. There's no need for turnitin.com. I don't like to use all those apps because I'm the person who knows how to find the information anyway, so it's not a big deal. I've caught plenty of people without having to worry about that. But you won't cheat, and so I just trust that you won't. But I'm also going to verify. So don't worry. On my end is how I'll find out how to determine if anybody did plagiarize. But just submit it to me as a typical email attachment. That's all you got to do. Thank you, Abraham. It's a good question. So back to the topics. The first one says monism, dualism. Explain the concept of dualism and monism. Then explain the concept of supervenience physicalism. So that's all coming next week. You can refer to the works of these 4 authors: Descartes, Stoljar, Smart, Turing. And then finally state your own view. Which thesis do you prefer and why? Like, do you prefer monism or dualism? So obviously you're going to learn about those concepts next week. And if you choose, that might be your paper topic. The second one is about time, which is what we're wrapping up today. It says, explain the way that Einstein changed the understanding of time with his theory of relativity using our assigned readings, class lectures, and video presentations. About that, video presentations. This is a prompt text that I've taken from previous semesters where we did, in fact, watch some video stuff to help bring this stuff into clearer focus. I'm going to try and find some of those videos that I can send you links to if possible. And if I can't, then just don't worry about the video presentation component of it. And just think of it as the text, okay? So it says here, explain the idea of the relativity of simultaneity. So you got to explain why these 2 lightning strikes could be described as simultaneous or not, depending on the 2 different observers and their state of motion. Then explain the 3 ways that time is like space, according to Ted Sider. And that's something we're going to discuss today. So hold that thought. And the way that space-time eliminates the idea that time moves, also relevant to today's lecture. So finally, state whether you prefer Einstein's concept of time or the classical view that existed before him and why. So that would be another subject if you want to write about time and this current topic. The third one is about knowledge, the theory of knowledge and epistemology that we just finished before this. And so what it says is explain the classical idea that knowledge can be defined by 3 separately necessary and jointly sufficient conditions. So that part of the essay requires you to discuss the definition of knowledge that was given by the Greeks. And you have to go into each of the component parts, like what is truth, what is belief, what is justification. And then you would also have to give an explanation of why it's not enough to just have one of them or 2 of them, but why all 3 of them are needed in order to actually have the state of knowledge. So you might want to provide examples for the sake of discussion where an individual in the case given satisfies some of the conditions but not others. And then you can explain the intuition that would not be considered knowledge. After that, after you discuss the ancient Greek definition, and you could also bring in some of the discussion of Plato, the Meno, and the difference between knowledge and correct opinion, which is discussed there. Finally, then you'll explain how Gettier showed that the classical definition of knowledge was insufficient. So you basically would then discuss those Gettier cases, however many, whichever ones you want. Finally, after that, you will discuss whether you prefer the classical account that came from the Greeks or if you found Gettier's criticism of it to be more accurate and why. So all 3 papers are based on different topics that we're studying. One is knowledge, one is time, and one is the philosophy of mind. And you have a choice between each of the 3. It's 3 weeks out before it's due, so you don't necessarily have to start working just yet. But as always, I would say don't maybe wait until the very last moment, because philosophy writing is a little harder when you're pressed against the clock and you're trying to organize your thoughts under pressure. So also, as always, I'm willing to help anybody who needs help. If you have questions and you're developing a draft definitely feel free to reach out to me. And as much as I can, I'll try and assist if you want. Okay, so that's just some info. We've given you the prompt now, and we're on our way towards the last part of the class where you're just going to write this paper, and in the end, obviously, you'll take your final. Okay, so without any questions on this for now, I guess I will go on and we'll finish with the writing of Ted Sider. That was our task last time that we got almost halfway or partially through. So right now it's about this man's ideas. Ted Sider, American philosopher, still living and working, born in 1967. His material we're reading is from 2005, and in our textbook they just titled it Time. Okay, so Ted Sider from 2005, article is Time. To bring you back up to speed a little bit, with Einstein, he said, suppose that two lightning strikes happen along a railway, and suppose they happen simultaneously. He asks the reader a question. What does it mean then that they happen simultaneously? And he says, you got to give a good answer, something that's detailed and precise, not just kind of weak, like, oh, they are the same time. It has to be so specific, this answer, how does that get interpreted, such that we could conduct an experiment that would be able to verify whether the two events were simultaneous or not. So he says, supply us with the means to conduct an experiment to test whether the two lightning bolts were simultaneous. Okay, well, here's the experimental test scenario that he suggests. Take the distance between the 2 points, A and B, where the lightning strikes occur. Designate the midpoint M, which is in between A and B. Place an observer there. If this observer, who can see both points in space at one time, sees the two lightning strikes happening in the same visual perception at once, then we would say relative to him, those were two simultaneous lightning strikes, as long as we make the additional assumption that light always moves at a constant and fixed velocity. So if the light from A to M has traveled the same distance as the light from B to M at the same speed, and they both reach M at the same time, then that we could deduce means that they have departed from A and B at the same moment. In other words, are simultaneous. But if we have a second observer, the second observer moving through the scene in the direction of travel toward B away from A, then if they intersect with the midpoint at a split second, at the same split second that the other motionless observer conducts their observation of the two bolts, then because he's being carried with constant velocity v towards the right, he's going to be dragged away from that midpoint, getting closer to B, further from A. And thus, the same two lightning bolts, which were seen as simultaneous relative to the initial observer, will be seen as happening in a different order to the second one who's moving, essentially because he's rushing towards B and away from A. The light from B arrives to his eyes faster than the longer stretch of distance that A has to travel to get to him. So he would see B first, then A. A third observer going in the opposite direction of travel would see A happen, then B. So the same two events of lightning bolts cannot be assigned any objective sequence. They can be seen as simultaneous or non-simultaneous in either order, depending on the condition of the observer, their velocity relative to the observed events. Now, Ted Sider, and by the way, after that, we also talked about how, according to the same theories of Einstein, there's such a thing as time dilation. So if you are moving through space quickly, you're passing through time slower than other observers who possess less velocity than you. And we talked about the twins paradox and some other interesting sort of puzzling results that follow from that. Okay, then it was Ted Sider. And with Ted Sider, we began by just saying, he claims that we should try and investigate the nature of time because it's puzzling and mysterious when you do that in any level of depth. He says one reason that it's very hard to analyze the concept of time is because we usually just take it for granted, but we shouldn't, because the ordinary concept of it breaks down under analysis. Why? Well, he says to start off that the idea that time moves is a common idea that we've heard people say, and many of us have said before. Time is flying, time is passing, time marches on, time never sits still, time waits for no man. All those different expressions indicate that time is somehow a thing that moves. But what does it mean to say that time moves? The author says that's puzzling because to even explain how anything moves through space, we have to make mention of the concept of time. For something to move from point A to point B, it has to be at different places at different times. If something stays in one place at all times, then it's not moving. So if time moves, then the analysis would suggest that it's moving because it's at different places at different times. But right there, we've begged the question and invoked the concept which we're trying to define. You cannot define the concept by means of itself. That's called a circular definition. If you ask what is a square, and somebody says anything that's in the shape of a square, that's not a very informative definition, is it? Because it doesn't give a definition of the word in other words. The proper definition of square that doesn't tell you the word square again is four-sided polygon with equal length sides and interior angles that are 90 degrees. But if I say square is anything square, I'm just repeating the word but not analyzing it. So if we say time moves because it's at different places at different times, we're committing a similar type of logical fallacy, using the concept to define it itself, therefore it remains undefined. So a second way of trying to interpret the concept of time moving is to say that the present moment is moving. Maybe because, earlier today noon was present, now that's in the past, now 2:45 p.m. is the present moment, but in an hour this will be the past and 3:45 p.m. will be the present moment. So maybe it is because the present moment alters its position that we say time moves. Although that sounds like a viable route, the author Sider says this doesn't work either, because what you're basically saying is that the present moment is at different places at different times. And yet again, it looks as if we are using the concept of time in an effort to provide its own definition. So finally then he says, look, there's a better way of going about this project. Let's just completely abandon the idea that time moves at all. Time, according to the space-time theory of Einstein, doesn't move. It just sits there and jointly contains all events like it's integrated with space. So on the space-time conception, we can get away from having to provide an answer to this difficult question. What do we mean when we say time moves? Because Einstein's theory of space-time holds the time does not move. It just sits there and holds all the events inclusive of the past, present, and future. And in that mindset, there's no change, there's no coming into or passing out of being, just all the events collected in the big block structure of space-time. Now, to get a more definite grasp on what is being claimed here, this space-time theory that replaces our common idea of time moving, he gives us some examples of how to think about this. So to have a better understanding of how to comprehend objects and events in the space-time theory of Einstein, we must make use of what are called space-time diagrams. Okay, so I'm going to show you such a space-time diagram here. It's the kind of diagram that's printed in the book on page, let me see what page it is. Is it 460? It's something like that. Yes, so on page 460 you would see this type of diagram. I'm just going to draw it up here for everyone's convenience. So what the diagram looks like is, first of all, here's a y-axis. That's like the horizontal axis. Then there's this x-axis, the vertical axis. Running through them both is this t-axis, which stands for time. Okay, lowercase t, x and y. Now, in an ideal world, I would be drawing this for you in a four-dimensional, well, at least in a three-dimensional space. What you would see is height, length, and depth, and then this would be the time dimension that runs through those. So these are two spatial dimensions, width and height, and this t-axis is the temporal time dimension running through them. If this was like a three-dimensional surface, then you'd see this as like a pop-out, where y and x are, the vertical and horizontal axis, and then t intersects through them. But given the limitations that I'm working with here, it's a flat two-dimensional surface. You just kind of have to imagine in your mind that there's depth. So y leads to x, which is a vertical axis, and t runs through the intersection point of x and y. Okay, now, to graph the existence of an object in one of these space-time diagrams, we just show the point where it initiates and where it ends in time. So you guys are, a lot of you starting off your college experience, many of you are freshmen or a couple years in, whatever. So a lot of you guys were probably born in this current century, unlike me. I was born in the 1900s. You're probably born, most of you, in the 2000s. So I'm just going to, let's say, graph the existence of one human being. Let's suppose that was born in the year 2000, probably close to your own birth year. So let's have this little mark designate the year 2000. Okay, and let's imagine that this person that we're talking about here lives a very healthy, happy, long life, like I hope all of you guys do. So they live like till 2100. Move this T a little bit further over, actually, so I have more space to draw. Okay, born in 2000, lives to be 100 years old, makes it to the year 2100, the next century, turn of the next century. So here's the space-time diagram that will graph this person's existence over the course of space-time, beginning here with their birth and early years. Okay, now what's shown here, I know it's a little small to the left, but what's shown here is a sequence of like little human-shaped stick figures initiating in 2000 and terminating over here in 2100. This is to demonstrate the existence of one human being that lived 100 years. So I'm going to ask you what I hope are some kind of common sense questions about features of the graph. Okay, so question for you, and you can just type the answer out. Why is it that the stick figure shape here is smaller along that x-axis at the beginning of the graph than later on at later points in the same diagram? So what's the reason for that, you think? Why is it that we show the person's figure smaller here along x and then increasing in height a little bit as we go to the right? I could have maybe made it a little more dramatic, but I tried to do that. So why is it that there's little stick figures there that are getting bigger? And that's correct, Julian. It's because the individual grows physically in terms of spatial size. So just think about yourself, right? You're a full-grown adult right now. But when you were born, it wasn't like that. When you're born, you're a tiny little baby possessing much less mass and occupying much less volume of space. So that's demonstrated in the graph by the initial drawings here being smaller along x and then getting bigger. So as time passes and the individual grows and develops, they reach their fully mature body size, and that continues through to the end of their life, which terminates over there with death at the end of the timeline. Okay, so we got that correct. The reason that there's a lesser vertical extension on x here than there is later in the sequence is because of the growth in terms of physical growth. Now, new question. Why is there this horizontal stretch along the t-axis? What is that supposed to stand for? Why do we have a streak that is stretched out along t, beginning here and ending there? What is that supposed to indicate? That's not about growth in physical size, but what does that designate in the graph, you think? Just based on common sense looking at that graph. What is the reason that we see this extended along t? The time the person has lived, right, the person's lifespan, because we occupy space, but on the space-time theory, we also occupy time. And so we are both extended in space along the three spatial dimensions, height, width, and depth, but also we are extended throughout time, according to this conception. So we exist both in space and time. Our spatial parts account for the existence of our body. That's like your hands, feet, torso, head, whatever. The different body parts are your spatial parts. They occupy space. But according to this theory, we also have what are called temporal parts. Okay, now I want to explain to you, this is an important concept for understanding this theory of space-time. Temporal parts. Okay, so just to repeat what I've said just now, the objects stretch horizontally along that axis because they endure across time. And they stretch along the other dimensions because they occupy some range of space. On this, sometimes it is called four-dimensionalist view of objects. 4 dimensions. Why? Because there's 3 spatial dimensions and 1 time dimension. Height, width, depth, and then that's the 3 spatial dimensions plus the temporal condition or the temporal dimension. On this 4-dimensional view of objects, objects like us or any other object that exists in space is built out of both spatial and temporal parts. So let me give you now your definition of temporal part. So what is a temporal part? Okay, so a temporal part is an object at a single moment of time. That is a temporal part of an object. Okay, so for example, if I was to cut a single slice out of this space-time graph, what sometimes metaphysicians call a time slice, one individual cross-section of this graph structure here would count as one temporal part of that person's existence. So metaphysicians sometimes call the way the graph is showing the human's existence here as a space-time worm. Just a metaphor because of the oblong worm-like structure shown in a graph that graphs the individual's existence over time. So if we were to take one little deli slice, one thin, absolutely thin cross-section of this space-time loaf or worm, whatever term you want to apply to it, then that one individual moment in the individual's overall life span would be one of their temporal parts. Okay, now I want to make sure this is a clear idea to you, so let me give you some quick questions. Hopefully you can just answer. Say, okay, we all take photos and post pics and stuff, right? So say that someone has a still frame image, like a photo of themselves. How many of their temporal parts are shown in the photo? Okay, like if you have a profile pic somewhere, or you just have like a photo of yourself that you like, I'm asking you this: how many temporal parts of you are in that photo? Are shown in the photo? It's one. Okay, exactly, Caitlin, Abraham, Julian. Yes. Let me ask then, since you seem to have the right understanding, why is it that it's just one temporal part that is shown in that photograph? Why? Why is it that it's only one? You can tell me. You know, why is there only one temporal part shown in the image, which is a photo of a person? It is one. It's not zero, and it's not two or three or anything else. It's exactly one. But why is there only one temporal part? Because it's one moment of time. Exactly, Caitlin. It's one single moment of time. The light, captured by the photographic device, shows us one single moment in the individual's existence. Now, if it was a video, like you had said there, Kenzie, like if it's a video, then there's duration to it. And in a little video clip of you, like you did a little TikTok video or something, right? How many temporal parts of you are there in the video? Now, this is one where you're not going to be able to give a number, but we can answer it this way, kind of like a formula. There are as many temporal parts of you in the video clip as there are what in the video clip? We're asking now about a video instead of a photo, so we're changing the example a little bit. We said already correctly that in a photo, there's one temporal part. Now, Julian, not exactly with seconds. I see why you're thinking that, but no, because a second can be broken down furthermore. Do you guys understand that? A second, there's like a half second. There's a tenth of a second. And in like a basketball game, a lot of stuff could even happen in 1 second. So you can't just say that there's one temporal part per second. There's one temporal part per what? So Rush, I see you saying frames. Okay, but look, there are limitations on frame rate and shutter speed in even the most high-powered cameras. So imagine that this thing has 1 million frames per second, right? Well, what we have to be thinking about here is like God's camera. It's got the maximum number of frames, right? So it has to not have any further minute subdivision into smaller parts of time. Caitlin, what are you saying? Combined pictures? I'm not sure what is your question referring to. Okay, so Rush, your next statement is infinite. Now, not exactly infinite. It is vastly large, but it cannot be infinite because that would lead to paradoxes. If there were infinite temporal parts of you, even in a short little interval of time, because each one of the moments takes some finite amount of time to pass, there would be an endless amount of time, even in the shortest little distance of time. So it can't be infinite. But Nicole, I'll repeat the question. How many temporal parts of you are there in a video which plays through for some duration of time? If you take a video of yourself, or if a video of you is recorded, how many of your temporal parts are displayed in the video? There are as many of them as there are, and I've seen these suggested answers from students, there are as many of those parts as there are seconds in the video. There are as many of those parts as there are frames in the video. Both are decent attempts to answer my question, but I rejected both because the limitation on frame rate means that there could be even more moments than the frame rate indicates. And limitations on seconds are not the most minute unit of time measurement, because there are nanoseconds, tenths of seconds, 100ths, 1000ths of seconds. So what is the answer if you can think about it? How many temporal parts of you would be shown in a video? Moments is the word that I'm looking for. There would be as many temporal parts of you shown in the brief video as there are moments that exist in the video. And how many moments are there in any interval of time? How many moments are there if we take the least unit of time to be something that cannot further be subdivided into smaller moments of time? Well, it's a lot of them. Maybe it's not infinite, but it's a huge number. I would not say infinite, you guys, because again, like I was just mentioning, if there were infinitely many moments in even like 1 second, then how could we ever exhaust those moments to get to the next second? So it's a big number, but whatever the number is, it's the number of moments that exist within that given span of time. And we're not talking about seconds or frames. We're talking about the least possible unit of time that exists. Now, in mathematics, for example, what are lines made out of? They're made out of points, okay? And points in mathematics are considered to have no extension and no breadth, but the line is composed out of infinitely many of those points. The sort of analog here in our discussion is that in time, there's a timeline, and the timeline has to have a least unit. So whatever that least unit is, the most minute distance that time can have, there's one temporal part of you for each one of those. So there's a lot of your temporal parts. At each moment that you exist, there's one. So I have another question for you right now. Looking at yourself, sitting here watching this lecture, how many temporal parts of you are seated in your chair right now, or on your couch, whatever you're sitting on? I assume you're sitting. So if you are, how many temporal parts of you am I speaking to right now? Or maybe I should say it differently. How many temporal parts of you are in the chair right now at this moment? There's actually there's a different answer, Sarush, but it's a little bit of a tricky question, so it'll take a moment for you guys to think it out. Yeah, the answer is 1, but the temporal part that I just asked you about previously a moment ago, is it the same temporal part as is sitting in your chair now? So I've asked you 2 questions at 2 times. Initially, I said, how many temporal parts are in your chair now? You said 1. And now I said, what about this current moment, which is a different moment because time keeps moving? Is it the same temporal part as the other one? No. And it is because these are different moments of time. Okay, so like when you started watching this lecture, like whatever, 30 minutes ago or something, there was a temporal part of you looking at the camera at that time, hearing me give the description of the essay prompt. Now there's another temporal part of you later on in your timeline, which is watching this part of the lecture. Now those are different temporal parts, but they're just both temporal parts of the same larger, stretched out space-time object. So how many temporal parts do you have? You have 1 for each moment that you exist. And they span throughout the entire arc of your life, from your birth all the way through to your death. Even the temporal parts that you've not yet experienced, according to this theory, are real, and they're even real now. So you tomorrow, or you getting coronavirus vaccine, or you getting married, having children, starting a business, retiring, all those temporal parts that lie ahead of you in your timeline, according to this conception of space-time, they're also just as real as this present moment is, and they're also just as real as the past. So there's no difference in terms of which of the temporal parts exist. They're all equally real. Now here I see a question, Abraham. So when there's a time slice, does it mean that that moment is gone? Okay, good question, but I just kind of was inadvertently mentioning something relevant to that. It's not gone. None of the parts are gone. They remain in space-time forever. So you back being a baby is still a temporal part that exists in space-time, and it always will. And this temporal part of you watching this lecture right now has always been a part of your timeline, and it always will exist as well. The weird thing is that your consciousness exhibits one of the temporal parts to you at a given time. And you're never able to actually perceive the union of all of them at once, because that's transtemporal. That's outside of time. Now, new question. If this theory is true, and what we're saying about temporal parts and so on, about objects, are you fully present in the seat that you're sitting in right now? Are you 100% present listening to me speak these words? Yes or no? What do you think? Are you fully present? Is the whole person there in your chair right now? No, 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 not at all. You're not fully present right now. How much of you is present at a given moment of time, according to this theory? What is sitting in your chair at one moment? Is it the whole person? No. It's just one at a time. What? It's a moment of you. A moment of you is watching me say these words right now. A different moment than the moment which started hearing me speak a little while ago, and another moment which is yet to happen as time passes into the next part of space-time. So you're not fully present sitting there in your chair. What is sitting in your chair is one temporal part at a given moment. Now, what you are then, in aggregate, the whole thing that you are, is the entire sequence of temporal parts, inclusive of past, present, and future. All of your temporal parts taken as an aggregate, that's what you are. So what you're ever able to observe and have conscious awareness of is one temporal part of your entire sequence at a time. Like, for example, the temporal part that's hearing me speak right now is not the whole person you are. The whole person you are is the sum total of all temporal parts collected as those seen on that graph right there. Okay, so it's kind of a weird thought, right? I mean, you feel like, here I am, I'm just completely here. But on this theory, you're also made out of temporal parts, and some of those temporal parts are in your future, some are in your past. Only this one that exists in this present moment is viewing the lecture, but all of them are equally real, okay? So according to this theory, there's only one temporal part of you at a time, but the whole enchilada, the whole space-time worm, is the entire being that you are. So the person is the sum total of all of their temporal and spatial parts collected. Now on this view, the space-time theory, reality consists of a single unified space-time which contains all of the past, present, and future. According to this theory, it's not just this present moment that is real. All the moments are real, even those which future and past temporal parts exist at. So you're supposed to now reconceive of things in a radical way. You know how you normally think that the future is wide open and it's not definite what will happen in it because it's yet to occur, and the past is gone and it cannot be changed? According to this space-time theory, the future is just as real as the past already was, and it already exists in this larger substratum of space-time. So all events, inclusive of the full past, present, and future, are all equally real. It's not that time unfolds. It's not that things come into being or pass out of being. All moments in the entire timeline of space-time, including all of your past and future, are just as real as the present moment that you're experiencing now. So your spatial parts are like your body parts, like your hands and feet. If you're holding up your left and right hand right now like me, you could just see that they exist. And of course you don't doubt that because you could just observe them. According to this theory, the future and past temporal parts of you are just as equally real as your body parts are that you're able to see. So like you at 5 p.m. today exists, and that is just as real as your right hand. And you in 2012 in elementary school or whatever, that temporal part of you also exists, and it's just as real as the part of you that's watching this lecture right now, and it's just as real as like your left hand would be. Okay, so that's the reconceiving of time that is elicited by embrace of this theory of space-time. For you then to kind of like buy into the theory, you have to reconceive of space and time. You actually have to start thinking of time as being much more similar to space than you would have thought previously. So the next thing I'm going to try and describe for you are 3 big similarities between space and time. that Ted Sider says are a consequence of accepting this space-time theory. So 3 similarities between space and time, that's coming next. I just wanted to say this. There's a whole bunch of films and stuff that explore, this is very heady material for science fiction. So there's a lot of films that have, worked on time travel themes and the theories of space-time, like whether it's Interstellar or, here's another one that came to my mind, the old movie Donnie Darko from, I think, the year 2000 or something. It's a very weird movie, maybe not to everybody's taste, but there are some scenes that play with this whole idea of being extended throughout time and not just space. So like in some of the scenes, Donnie Darko, the main character, it's like there's this projection that emanates out from his chest area, and it shows a line of travel that his body will traverse as he moves from his current position to what he does next, right? What that little solar plexus projection is trying to show in the film universe is his direction of travel through his life. In metaphysics, that's sometimes called a world line. And for each object in the universe, there is a world line. It's the path the object travels through space and time as it goes through its entire existence. So like there's a world line for you, according to this idea. You could trace it, it'd look like a trail. It'd be the trail that leads you to your current seated position, and whatever you're gonna get up and do next, that trail will continue on into space in the same direction that your body will travel. The entire stretched out accordion-like sequence of all temporal parts traces a world line. And this is just giving a graphic depiction of that on the board. So our consciousness doesn't have access to all of the temporal parts at a moment, because at one moment you're just one part in the system, but the whole system exists. That's what this idea is trying to put forward. Okay, so then let's go over the next thing, which is 3 similarities between space and time, according to the space-time theory, as presented here by Ted Sider. According to the space-time theory of Einstein, okay, so let us keep in mind the bigger picture. Einstein establishes through the theory of relativity, the relativity of simultaneity. With that in place, we can no longer say there's an objective order to the linear time sequence that we ordinarily think events occur within. And if there's no fact of the matter, whether 2 events A and B are simultaneous or not, or whether one is before the other, then we have to actually grant the existence of both moments independently of the time sequence. And that, in the bigger picture, implies that all moments of space-time are equally real. And it's only the condition of the observer that allows them to witness some and not others at a given moment. Now, in Ted Sider's analysis, it's better to embrace the space-time theory of Einstein than to go with common sense idea of time, because the everyday conception of time holds that time moves, but it's impossible to give a non-circular explanation of what it means for time to move. So on Einstein's theory, we just get rid of that whole concept. Time doesn't move, it's bounded up with space, and it's just sort of like a container within which all the moments of space-time exist, including past, present, and future, but there's no movement and there's no change. To help understand that theory of space-time and why it's changing the way we see time, we have to explain these 3 similarities between space and time according to the theory. So here's the first of those 3 similarities that he talks about. First, he says, in terms of reality. And here's what he means by this. So objects which are far away in space are just as real as objects that are present in space, like close up. And the same is true of time, according to this theory. Namely, that events that are presently happening are just as real as events that are far away in time, like way out in the future or the past. So objects that are far away are just as real as objects that are present in space. The same is true of time. Okay, so objects that are far away in space are just as real as objects that are present, and the same is true with time. So let's think about how objects are still real when they're not close by to you in space. This illustration was a little easier back in the day when we had face-to-face class meetings, because I could just say to the whole class assembled in one room, take a look at this marker. Is it real? And it's close to you there. And then I say, now if I took it out of the room, would it still be real? And we go through that whole demonstration. Now I have to use a different example because we're all in different rooms. So take, for example, the computer or device that you're watching this lecture on, okay? Is it right in front of you? Yes, by definition, if you're watching this, it's gotta be. So you agree that your computer or device, I mean, maybe it's a tablet or phone, but let's say you're watching a laptop right now. Wouldn't you agree that the device you're viewing this lecture on is real? Certainly, it's real. It's right there in front of you. It's not something fake or just imaginary. So there's your computer, and you could even touch it, perhaps, like I'm doing to mine. Question though, what if I took this computer that you're watching this on and leave you on the quarantine in your house or whatever you're doing, and I take that same computer and I take it with me over to the East Coast, take it to New York. Now you're back here in California on the West Coast. If you're there. I know some people have moved around right now, but say you're still on the West Coast in California and I've got your computer and it's way over in New York. Is it still real though, is my question. It's real right now and it's certainly right in front of you, but what if I just take it farther away? I mean, maybe I didn't need to use New York as the example, but I just randomly selected that. Would it still be real on the East Coast? Or does it, like, if it goes too far away from you, it stops existing? What do you say? Still real or not? Still is real. Okay, good. It's exactly the correct answer. It's not like distance in space makes things stop existing. Like your hand is right here in front of you, but if the hand was cut off and like put in a ditch 100 miles away, it's still real. It doesn't have to be next to you for it to exist. So obviously things that are close are real, but even as they go farther and farther away, they still are real. If I was to take that same computer you're watching this on, and let's say I had the means to send it off to the moon, send it in a rocket to the moon, and I set your laptop down next to the American flag over there on the lunar surface. Now you're on the Earth, computer's way up on the moon. That's farther than New York, but is it still real? And we all know the answer. Yes, it still is. Here's the point. No matter how far away it goes, or how close, but it doesn't really matter. The distance, whether it's close, whether it's far, it doesn't change how it's real. It's not like only when it's close by to you does it exist. And as it gets farther and farther, it's getting less and less real. It's just as real far away as it is close. Okay, now what's being said here is that when it comes to time, the same thing is true. But now we're not talking about distance in space, but distance in time. So, like you graduating from Cal State Fullerton, which let's say today has not happened yet. If it does happen later, then that event is real. And it's real even now. It's not that it's something which has no definite fact. So all the future events are real. The outcome of the next presidential election, we're waiting to see how it's going to go presently. But given the fact that the election will have an outcome and that it does play out, that outcome and result is already real now. So the present moment that we're in is certainly real, right? Look at your watch. It says 3:19. And so this moment that we're experiencing live, clearly it's real. But the point being made here is that even those moments that are far away from the present, way out in the future, or way back in the past, people living 100 years from now, the existence of those people in space-time is real, and it's just as real as this moment that we're experiencing right now. There's no difference between the past, present, and future. It's not like the future is not real, only the present is. It's not like the past is something that happened, but the future is just totally open. It's just the same. All the events are equally real. So the present is just like the future, and it's just like the past. They all equally exist, and no matter how far away in time an event is from you, it's just as real as the present. Okay? Now, sometimes when we talk about time, we use spatial metaphors in language. Like you say, hey, remember back then, back in the day when I was younger? When you say back, it almost calls to mind that there's a backward direction and you've moved forward from it, and now that's something you move past. Or other times when you anticipate the future, people say, I wonder how it's going to be for me, you know, way out there in the future. When I get to the future, I wonder what that's going to be like. What lies in store for me in the future, as though it's kind of like a journey and you're making progress along a timeline, but the future is something that lies in wait for you. According to this idea, all of those moments are just as real as this one is right now. And so seeing it that way, you start to see time as much more similar to space. Objects that are far away in space don't stop existing. And moments that are far away in time also don't stop existing. They're just as real as this one is, whether located right in the present or far away in a distance of either time or space. And Kyle, you said, if this is true, then can you change time? The answer would be no, actually. No, you would not be able to change anything. Everything that you ever will experience is already fully laid out, like as though you're just a character in a video game that's already been programmed. So all of the future states that you'll ever experience are predestined. I don't know if I should even use the word pre, because there's no prior. They're all existing. They're all equally real. So if this theory is correct, I just want to wish everybody good luck, because you kind of need it, since nothing you do can possibly change the future. But anyway, that's one similarity between space and time in terms of reality. Objects far away in space are real. Objects far away, events far away in time are real. Next one. So next point of similarity is in terms of parts, okay? Okay, in terms of parts, and all that this is going over is something that we kind of just brushed past a moment ago. This point, that objects occupy space by having spatial parts, and objects occupy time by having temporal parts. And likewise, objects occupy time and endure through time by having those temporal parts, okay? So there's this next similarity between the two concepts, space and time. When it comes to space, like, for example, you would displace water if your body was placed in a body of water, and the displacement of the water shows that you have volume, that you have mass, right? You're sitting in a chair right now. Your chair is occupied by the body parts that compose your body, right? So you take up space and have mass because of those spatial parts, physically your body parts. Now, other objects that are not human bodies also have spatial parts. Like, take this table. There's the surface of the table, there's the legs of the table, it has its own different parts. So any object that exists in space takes up the space because it has those spatial parts. Likewise, to have some existence across time and to endure through time, you're built out of temporal parts as well. And the claim is that these temporal parts, like you tomorrow or you yesterday, as opposed to you presently right now, those temporal parts of you are just as real as the different body parts that you have. So, you know, you're sitting in a chair, and nobody, I don't think in this room, or not this room, but in this lecture, disputes that you have, let's say, a right arm or left arm. But the same claim is being made about your temporal parts. They're just as equally real. They're not like some kind of theoretical construct or just language idea. Really, you do have temporal parts lying ahead of you in the future and behind you in the past. And they all occupy the points on your timeline of existence. If there was like an object that only existed for an instantaneous split second and then ceased to exist, like maybe a little particle of antimatter that instantly gets annihilated as soon as it erupts out into existence, then it would only have one temporal part. But you and I, thankfully, we exist for a lot longer than that. So we have many, many temporal parts. The longer we exist, I guess the more of them we have. But there's one for each moment, and throughout the entire space-time duration of your existence, you have those parts, and they're just as real as the spatial ones are. Okay, so that's the second similarity. Now I have one more. The third similarity is in terms of these words here and now. So third similarity between space and time in terms of the words here and now. Okay, I want to tell you something about these words. The way that these show another similarity between space and time is that these are both relative terms. Their meaning depends on the context of the speaker. Okay, so both are relative terms. Whose meaning depends on the context of the speaker, okay? Relative terms, meaning depends on the speaker's context. So let me help you understand this with a quick question. Answer this if you can. You've heard the word here used before. Tell me, where is here located? Where is that place called here? Can you tell me the location of here? How do I find it? Where's here at? What's the definition of the word here? Where can a person go to find that place? Tell me, where's here at? Anybody? I know you use this word. So where is it? Where is it at? Context of the speaker, right. So it's kind of a trick question, obviously. There's no single place that's called here. It's a relative term, isn't it? Where is it? Well, it depends on where the speaker is when they speak. Okay, so like if I tell you that here in California, well, maybe I shouldn't even say the name. Here in this state, we have managed the coronavirus outbreak pretty well. And then if a person in New York is speaking, they may say, here in this state, we have the worst outbreak in the whole country. So are those contradictory statements? Here, it's not a bad outbreak. Someone speaks in New York and says, here, it's a bad outbreak. Are they both speaking the truth? Well, yes, because there's no single location referred to by the term here. The term's reference depends on wherever the speaker is at. So like if I say to you, here, I've got a cat, you know, maybe if you don't own a cat, you could not say the same thing. You speaking from your current location, wherever you're watching this video at, you know, it's a different here, isn't it? So there's no single universal objective location called here. It's not like if you open up a globe or a map, you're going to see it written on the map and everyone could just go to that spot. Here is relative and does depend on wherever the speaker is at. If I tell you that here it's sunny and a person in Antarctica says here it's not sunny, we are both perhaps speaking the truth because the word here in my mouth is spoken in a different location than the word here spoken in their mouth. Now, the same is true of the term now. Okay, so when is now at? When is the time point referred to by the word now? When does now happen? Well, now, similar to here, doesn't have any single universal point in time. It refers to whenever the speaker says the term, whereas with here, that refers to wherever the speaker is when they say the term in space. So now, for example, if I say, what time is it now? You'll look at your watch and you say, about 3:29. But if you're watching this lecture later on as a playback, and it's like 6 p.m., you would get a different answer to the question, what time is it now? Because that context of speech is happening in a different point in time space than the initial one was. So what that means is something, in a way, interesting, that there's no objective fact about when now is. And that's something that many people would have found surprising, because you might think there's only one present moment, and it's this moment, now. But already that's in the past. So the word now just refers to the temporal part that speaks the term at that point in time. Abraham, the question you say, so does now connect to temporal parts? Yes. If a temporal part of me that exists in 2030 says, now I'm going to retire from being a professor, that temporal part of me is speaking at a different point in space-time. And so the reference of their speech act is that local part of time and space, not this part. So it is the temporal part of your being that makes a statement with the word here or now included within it. So thinking of yourself as a set aggregate of a bunch of little temporal parts. Take out from your space-time diagram the point in time in the graph where the temporal part says the word now. Then we can assign a time coordinate to that speech act elicited by the one part among many in the sequence, in the series. Okay, so that I would hope to answer your question, Abraham. Anyway, then, this means that there's no single moment now. When people in 1920 were saying, now we have a vaccine for the Spanish flu, I don't know if they ever actually did, I don't know my history about that as well, but when they said now, they weren't referring to 2020. When we say now, we are, and people, temporal parts of them or whatever, living in 2120, when they say the term now, they refer to the time surrounding this speaker at that point. So there's relativity in the application or meaning of here and now. Both are relative, and that helps us to further see how time and space are similar. No objective significance to the meaning of words that refer to them. It's based on relativity. Okay, so I'm going to erase this. And then I just have a few more points from Ted Sider. So he says, this analysis of time and space, the space-time theory of Einstein, it's really good because it helps us to avoid all the very puzzling difficulties of giving meaning. So Ruth, sorry, your question. So these are all relative of spatial and temporal. That point there was just to mention that when you talk about now, you're talking about time. When you talk about here, you're talking about space. The space-time theory says that space and time are very similar and are interlinked together. They're not so different as many people had thought. To see how they're similar, another element of the similarity is that in both cases with the words here and now, they're relative terms, which gives a sense that they are similar in the way the concepts are understood. It's not like now is not relative, but here is. And so since they're both relative, that gives further insight into the reconceptualization of time that is elicited or licensed by this theory. Okay, good question. So next thing about Sider is this. He says the space-time theory has its virtues. One virtue is we no longer have to get into the confusing mess of trying to provide some non-circular explanation of how time moves. Now in the space-time theory, never mind, it doesn't move. It's just integrated with space and it contains everything and it's all just sitting there laid out with no movement, change, or anything like that. But he says as good as it may be for those theoretical reasons, a lot of people just find it to be deeply counterintuitive. I don't know if it's scientists and philosophers that say that, but a lot of everyday people would find this to be so strange and bizarre and counter to their common sense that they can't accept it. Like, for example, some people may respond in this way, and this is what he put down. He says, some people might claim it goes too far, and they would give a comment like this. Past and future objects don't exist. The past is gone, and the future has not yet happened. Things do not have temporal parts. At any time, the whole object is present, not just one temporal part of it. There are no past or future parts left out. And now is not like here. The present moment is objectively unique, unlike the relative bit of space around the speaker when they say the word here. So those could seem to be counter-arguments against it. Now he says one further criticism of it is the notion that nothing really changes according to this theory. According to the theory, like you, for example, you as an elderly person, you as a little baby, you as the current young adult that you are, nothing has really changed. All the points in your timeline are already fully laid out, and they just sit there for all time, not undergoing any alteration. But he says this is not the deepest criticism, because we can still discuss the idea of change in a way. For example, if you have a haircut, nowadays it's hard to get a haircut, right, with the pandemic, but say a person got a haircut and they had long hair, after the haircut they have short hair. One way of looking at it from an everyday point of view is to say they have changed. Their hairstyles changed. They had long, now they have short. On the space-time theory, there has not been change, though, because one temporal part of the individual's lifespan had the long hair. A later temporal part of the individual in the same time sequence has short hair, but the two temporal parts themselves have not changed. They've always been lying in the timeline with the hairstyle that they happen to have. Nonetheless, we could reconceive of change as qualitative difference of different temporal parts of the same object. So like if I lost a finger or something, the way to describe that on the space-time theory would be to say the so-called change is defined as me having had a temporal part with all 5 fingers, and then a later temporal part in the same graph doesn't have that property. That could be called change because at time 1 there's the finger, and at time n+1 it doesn't. But nonetheless, this is only change in a manner of speaking. In the deepest sense, the whole object, inclusive of all its temporal parts with their properties and attributes, has always existed. So he says, is this the most fatal objection to the idea? Probably not, because all it requires is that we think of change in a slightly different way, as different attributes of different temporal parts. But that by itself is not so counterintuitive that it cannot be rationally believed. Another objection, and maybe an even more important one, would be that if time and space are really so similar and are integrated into one common structure, then how come objects can move any direction in space, forward, backward, diagonally, but they only seem to be able to go in one direction in time, from the past marching forward towards the future? Essentially, if time and space are similar, then shouldn't we be able to access previous points in time, just like we can go backwards in space? There should be, in theory, the possibility of backwards causation and time travel. There should be the theoretical possibility of future events being capable of exerting a causal influence on the past. Now, we never see that happening. So does that mean that this demonstrates the theory is wrong? What Ted Sider says is that though it sounds very bizarre and inconceivable, time travel scenarios are not theoretically impossible, just probably physically beyond our means. In fact, that is the consensus view, that if there were the possibility of taking a human body and exposing them to certain types of forces, then there would be the possibility of backwards time travel, but the human body couldn't sustain the exposure to the forces. So it's probably going to forever remain a merely theoretical topic, but that does not mean that it's not logically impossible. So he says some well thought out time travel scenarios could in fact occur. It's just that we'll probably never actually see that happen in physical reality. See, there's a difference between when a technology exists and when it's possible. If you imagine the world before the 1900s, people might have been thinking the entire thousands, hundreds of thousands of years that humans existed. Look at the moon up there. Wouldn't it be crazy if a person could be sent up to the moon and walk on it? They probably would just laugh, thinking, well, that's something that, if physically there was a way of transporting a body up there, then that could happen. But we'll never build such a tool. We'll never build such machinery. Now, of course, it did end up happening. But even before we invented the technology, the theoretical conceivability was there. So we may be living in a part of the sequence of time where there is no such thing as backwards causation or causal influence from future to the past. But if that technology is even theoretically possible according to physics, then maybe it's just that we either can't or won't build it, not that it's not impossible for some kind of theoretically possible life form. Well, there's a little more I wanted to say to you guys about time travel scenarios. Maybe I can kind of sneak that in at the very beginning of next class. There was one more author in this topic on that subject, David Lewis, and his paper is called The Paradoxes of Time Travel. So maybe I could just send you guys a few notes on it over the weekend or some video clips, because I do want us to move into the next subject, which is philosophy of mind. And there's not a lot in David Lewis's article. There's just some kind of fun and really weird, almost entertaining time travel scenarios that he ponders. So just to sort of cap off our unit on that, I would like to maybe spend 10 or 15 minutes on it. And then we'll move right into our philosophy of mind material. So if you can, just try and skim the David Lewis, if possible, on paradoxes of time travel, and then get ready to start into our next topic, which is philosophy of mind. That's going to be the first author, Descartes. We're looking at his sixth meditation now. That's the last chapter of his book. And we've already read meditation 1 and 2. Maybe I can just throw out one quick scenario since we do have 6 minutes, 5 minutes left. Okay, let's go over this quick scenario. Say you have a person named Tim. Tim hates his grandfather. Tim wants to kill his grandfather, actually. It's a little dark, but he wants to kill his grandfather. Here's the problem, though. His grandfather's already dead. So you might be thinking, what's the point? I mean, if your grandpa's dead, well, why would you want to kill him? I don't know. Tim's got his problems. He hates his grandfather. Maybe he's read his biography and he thinks this is an evil man. So he wants to kill him, even though he's already dead. The thing is, he wants to be the cause of his death. He doesn't just want him to have died. He wanted to be the one who caused him to die. So he inherited a bunch of money from his grandfather. And let's say he uses that money to build a time machine device. Okay. So what he's going to do is go back in time to when his grandfather was still alive. And what he wants to do is kill his grandfather at that earlier time in the past. Suppose, though, that he travels back to a year that is before the time that the grandfather ever met the grandmother, who eventually would result in the conception of one of this person's biological parents. Okay? So get my scenario. Tim wants to go back in time, kill his grandfather, but if he did do it at that point in time, then his grandfather never would have met the grandmother, and therefore, essentially, one of Tim's parents would never have been born, and Tim wouldn't have been born. So ask yourself, can Tim successfully kill the grandfather, yes or no? What do you think? That's the question. And that's something in David Lewis's article, so maybe we're just going to cover a little bit of it right here. Tim goes back, wants to kill the grandfather. Let's say he's trained up, he's got his gun, he's fully motivated, and he appears in the year 1920, wants to get rid of his grandfather back then. What do you think? Can he kill him or not? Anthony, you raised one issue. You say not in the same universe. Good. He couldn't do it in the same universe, and why not? Why won't he succeed in his attempt? What's the problem? I mean, he's there, right? He's got his gun. How come he's not going to succeed? You can tell me. It's a little logical puzzle. So what is your statement, Julian? Yes, he can, but he will never be present in... I'm not sure if I could follow your comment there, but Kyle, you got the right intuition, it seems, because he wouldn't exist. If he was able to carry out this act, then he would have prevented the existence of one of his two parents, and therefore, how could he have ever traveled back into time if he eliminated the possibility of his own future birth or conception? So it seems like no matter what Tim does, he's bound to fail in his attempt to take out the grandfather for a simple reason, that the universe cannot harbor a contradiction. For example, look at yourself. Were you born? Yes. Do you think we could somehow cancel the fact that you were born? No. I mean, maybe you could be killed now or something, but there's no way we can eliminate the fact that you already were born. So even if, let's say, in 10 years, you go back in time to the time you were born, trying to make sure it never happened, of course you would not be able to succeed in any such attempt, because given the fact that you have traveled back, by hypothesis, you never did die at an earlier point in the sequence of events in your overall timeline. So what's going to really happen with Mr. Tim is he's going to get back there, and despite his best efforts, he's going to fail for whatever reason. Maybe the gun will jam. Maybe he'll change his mind at the last second. Maybe he'll shoot somebody, but it turns out to be mistaken identity, not his grandfather. Maybe his grandfather will reach down and pick up the newspaper at the last moment, and the bullet will whiz right over his head, and then the gun will jam. But whatever does happen, all Tim is going to find out is the reason that his grandfather was never assassinated at that earlier point in time. And it's not as if there was an original 1920 where the assassination attempt didn't occur, and the new 1920 now populated with Tim coming back in time. Instead, we would have seen that this is always a part of space-time, this little loop in which one temporal part of Tim is in the past and then loops back into the future. So the set of events is already fully set out. It's not like there's an introduction of a new element when the time traveler makes his journey. This seems to be somewhat of a paradox to some interpreters, because looking at Tim, it seems like just given his means and motive, he should be able to succeed. But given the fact that that would contradict the timeline of history, it seems that he should not be capable of success. David Lewis thinks that the best, most reasonable response to this is to say that he would not be able to succeed because it would involve a logical contradiction in the timeline, but that the thought that he could have succeeded is based on the feeling that he could have, not the actual outcome. Julian, you say this. So does that mean perhaps, say I go back in time and I kill someone, does that mean that the whole timeline will change or just that single part? you won't be able to kill the person unless they're already dead. You won't be able to kill the person if they did not die at that point in earlier time. So you can't change the past. According to the most coherent time travel scenarios, the past is fixed. You could go back and witness the way things happen. But if you go back into, like, say, 1965 to watch the Beatles, you're not going to be able to assassinate John Lennon in 1965 because in our universe, he lived until 1980 when he was later assassinated. Hopefully not by a time traveler. But anyway, the date of his death cannot be changed. The assassin would arrive in the past and would have a botched, failed attempt to try and make a difference. You say this, say someone died, but can you change how they died? No, their death and the facts of their death remain settled, just like the conditions of your own birth. Now you talk about the Flash. I'm not so well versed in the Marvel Comics universe, which Flash lives in. But even if he's able to warp or bend the passage of time by going through space at such high velocities, he's not going to be able to alter events. There's a film that is really great on this, which I think is definitely trippy and mind-bending. So if anyone has free time, you could watch it. It's a Spanish film originally, but I used to show it in this class when I had the time to do it. This semester, we didn't get around to it, but it's this. I'm putting the typed name of it there. So if you're a fan of science fiction and film, and this is something you might find interesting, check out Time Crimes, or in Spanish, Los Cronocrímenes. It's a good movie, and it goes over some of the points we're raising here. So all right, everybody, we've gone to the end. We've run out of time, I guess, but according to this theory, this lecture was always part of the order of events in your life, so I guess it was destined to happen. I wish you guys a lot of good luck. Last question, though, Caitlin. I may have missed this, but will you be emailing us those prompts you mentioned? Oh, yeah, they've been emailed. They've been emailed earlier today, so they're already out there. You can take a look at them. Can anybody else confirm that you've seen it, please? Just one quick second. Did you get it? Caitlin, I know you maybe haven't looked yet, but did anyone else check and notice that they're there? I want to make sure there wasn't a failure to deliver them. Titanium announcements for our course from today. Did you get it? Who could tell me? You saw it? Okay, yeah. So if any of you got it, it was mass mailing to all. So it's there. Feel free to go into your inbox and your notifications and to view, print, or download it. And you got 3 weeks to work. Okay? Well, we'll be back on Monday, everyone. Try to read the Descartes article. Maybe I'll have a few last things to say about Lewis, but I'm glad that I at least talked to you about the grandfather paradox. The grandfather paradox is that whole situation with Tim and his grandfather. So that's the question that I was kind of trying to get at. Okay, guys, have a great one. Hopefully you're all doing really well. Good to see you again, and have a good weekend, and we'll be back in touch on Monday. Okay? Bye-bye.